and welcome to CIMM's Identity Resolution Workshop. Thanks for joining us. Most of you know me, but for any guests, I'm Jane Clarke, CEO, Managing Director of CIMM, the Coalition for Innovative Media Measurement. Now, today's workshop is an offshoot from our 10th annual cross-platform video measurement and data summit we held back in February. We had a couple of sessions about identity resolution, but we didn't really have enough time to dig into this rapidly changing area. So today we're going to do that. Also, since that time, there hasn't been a week without news of changes in ID tracking. So we'll address these evolving challenges. So I'll give this brief introduction, and then Bruce Biegel of the Winterberry Group will provide us with a framework for understanding the complicated and converged TV and digital identity ecosystem. Then we'll bring back the panelists from the summit with a slight change in our representative from InfoSum. And then we'll switch gears, then we'll dig deeper into this topic of identity and all of the recent developments as well. And then we'll switch gears a little for the last panel, and we'll hear a bit about a new TV data initiative just announced today that's a use case illustrating the need for solutions for identity resolution. So the goal of today's workshop is to make sure that we're all up to speed on the changes underway concerning the deprecation of digital identity data used to track consumers, for creating audience segments, for activating against those segments, and for measuring attribution. And we have the additional goal of understanding these changes within the converged TV data ecosystem. As we all know, connected TV doesn't use cookies. IP address and device ID provide the links. And the unit of analysis is households rather than individuals or devices. Whoops, let me back up a second here. And so for many years now, already, MVPDs and smart TV OEMs have designed their data matching protocols to be privacy compliant. However, there's still potential risks as the consumer and regulatory environments change, and we need to understand these. There's also another reason that CIMM's interested in identity resolution, and that's because concerns have always been raised about the quality and accuracy of ID matching. You know, we're currently reviewing a research proposal to better understand not only the differences in match rates, but also the biases introduced in the matching process. When a match is conducted, the unmatched data is left on the cutting room floor, as it were. And as an industry, we don't fully understand the differences between matched and unmatched data sets. So that's another reason we're trying to fully understand this process of resolving identity and how it's changing. Note that we're calling this event today a workshop because we'd like to offer the opportunity for you to ask questions and interact with the speakers. Note that this isn't easy with a large group in the virtual format, but please just use the Q&A box at the bottom and we'll monitor it to relay the questions to the speakers. Now, I'm just going to spend a couple more minutes setting up the challenge as to why identity resolution is so important to cross-platform video measurement, you know, why CIMM is interested in this. Now, CIMM members may be tired of seeing this slide, but it's been our evolving kind of vision and roadmap since the beginning. You know, we're advocating for granular cross-platform video measurement to enable planning, activation, optimization, and attribution, you know, connected with some form of identity resolution. And as I shared at the summit, you know, we're seeing this now as 4 main building blocks to get to, you know, converged TV and video measurement. And the industry is making progress in all these areas, but more needs to be done. As both technical and business challenges remain. So we need standardized second-by-second census-like data from smart TVs and set-top boxes that's been combined to create TV content and ad exposure data sets, you know, that are as scaled and as nationally representative as possible. We need standardized second-by-second digital census data from sites and apps for both content and ad exposure. We also need single source panels or separate TV and digital panels that can be linked, that can be used to calibrate data missing from the large data sets, including over-the-air TV households and, who's in front of the television set, the co-viewing. And finally, we need this form of ID resolution to deduplicate reach across all the touch points, to create audiences, to manage ad frequency, to conduct attribution. And this may not be one solution, as we're seeing, but interoperability between multiple solutions as they evolve. So as you can see in this design from a CIMM workshop with EY that's published to our website, identity resolution is so important because it's the glue that holds together all the fragmented and decentralized data sets, to enable TV data interoperability. And all of the current changes in deprecation of signals for digital identity are impacting parts of this design. So finally, I just have to say that from a CIMM point of view, I think that the changes in how we track consumers are going to end up making a stronger ad ecosystem. Consumers need to feel confident that their data is being used responsibly by the companies with whom they interact, or they're going to withhold that data. They need to understand the value exchange, and it has to work for both sides. So I'm actually confident that this industry reset will end up putting consumer needs first, but still enable marketers and media companies to find productive ways to monetize their first-party relationships, with their customers while improving that customer experience. So now I'm going to stop sharing this if this works. And let's see. We're going to now move to our next speaker, Bruce Biegel, partner at Winterberry Group, who's going to share his screen. And he's going to give us a framework to better understand the challenges and opportunities in identity and in collaborative data sharing. So welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you for that introduction. Just give me a second to do what our favorite thing to do is try to figure out how to make screen share work. And here we go. All right. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about what we have heard over the last 9 months of interviewing. It was about this time last year that we launched a research effort into the background of identity to understand the impact of Google's announcements, Apple's actions. We were joined in this by a multiple group of sponsors, many of whom are speaking here today. We probably did 175 interviews, hour-long video interviews. We spoke to companies from Adobe through Google, through Zeotap, so all across both domestically as well as internationally. And we also dropped a survey on brand marketers to see what they had to say. So we felt we captured the perspective of the supply side as well as the demand side of the market. What I'm going to go through very quickly, what's driving identity and collaboration solutions, some definitions, because part of setting a framework is getting everybody on the same page on how we think about things and how we speak to them, and then some outlook on how changes are going to impact the market and what we expect, which the panel will then continue and go much deeper than I will. So why now? That's really the first question. There are a couple of drivers. It started with the explosion in the number of addressable devices. We started working in research on identity. I think our first report was 2016 and then again in 2018. And back then it was about 3 devices per person. And when we spoke to people last year, the numbers came out closer to 7 or 8 per person and closer to 13 per household. So all of a sudden, this tracking, this finding became more of a challenge, and frankly, privacy. regulation. We had GDPR almost 3 years ago. We had CCPA. Now we've got CPRA coming. We had the impact of Apple's IDFA announcements and actions, some that are imminent and some that I'm sure will continue in the future. And then January of last year was probably the big news when Google announced deprecation of the cookie. And the market said either it's going to be an all Google world or the regulators are going to save us, but none of those were really the answer. We also heard and have seen the topic of trust and first-party relationships really rise. Who will I trust with my data? How do I want to think about that value exchange? From a market perspective, you know, the walled gardens kept growing their walls higher, whether it's Google and Facebook, but then we had a whole new set of gardens, the retail media marketplaces. Obviously, Amazon, with now somewhere in the neighborhood of a 10.7% share of digital ad dollars, but not just Amazon. It's Walmart, it's Kroger, it's Target, it's CVS. So consumers are going in and out of all of these gardens, these marketplaces, with a degree of transparency, and in some places, a lot less transparency. At the same time, we saw linear and digital video audiences increase with a major shift last year towards connected TV and to streaming. And it's how should we address them? How do I follow people who are Bruce or look like Bruce or Bruce's household across that phone to that laptop to that tablet to the TV in the living room? Because ultimately the marketers said, we just want to buy that Bruce, and we want to buy him across. And of course, with all this came challenges in measurement and attribution, which this audience, more than others, will know well. At the organizational level, marketers still demanding better, more customer-centric marketing, feeding into that trust, feeding into first party. We're starting to see, with the explosion of channels, we're seeing better unified decisioning and orchestration, so we can do consistent messaging, and a more complex supply chain. You know, one of the surveys that we dropped in partnership with the IAB, we said, you know, how do you expect the loss of this third-party audience cookies to affect the use? And it really came down to there's going to be a focus on first party. We still need identity resolution solutions, like that's not going away. As Jane was speaking before, we need to link and tie this together. And we're going to have to partner more. We're going to have to build out these second-party relationships. When we think of the markets, I'm going to go broader than Jane was, you know, we think of three ecosystems. Personalization on owned is your website, it's your apps, it's your stores as a marketer. It's where you have that direct first-party relationship. Programmatic paid digital media world, also publish your first-party data. The digital ecosystem, how is that going to change? But it's different because that was where we saw third-party cookies and the first set of challenges. And then we start to see the advanced TV, addressable, CTV, OTT, and linear evolution. And in this market, which was not third-party cookie dependent, you know, again, first-party data, first-party cookies, increasingly important. But that first-party data sits right at the hub of all of this. And we need to be thinking about, what does that mean? We did ask in the US and UK in November, brands, how advanced? So if this whole conversation about first-party data is important, where are we? Well, not surprisingly, over in the UK and in our conversations in Europe, they're a little bit further ahead. They were forced to move further and faster, but the United States coming on strong, picking up speed, but ultimately only about a third of brands have a comprehensive first-party strategy. We are far from being where we should be or where we could be. And frankly, we think that's going to take a while for companies to get there. With this privacy on the rise, with the changes in identifiers and that conversation about second-party data, we see this collaboration, this need. We're not going to have the scale. We're going to have places where that consumer becomes invisible. And brands and the media owners said, all right, how do we partner better in a world without third-party cookies and with a loss of identifiers. It's between brands and their agencies. It's brands and the media owners. It's brands and cooperatives. It's working with data exchanges. It's frankly, with multi-brand corporations that may have different privacy policies as they think about collection. How does a brand cooperate and collaborate internally? All of these changes coming together to kind of drive the market. And we said, hey, this new thing, collaboration, is coming, but it's not actually a new thing. You know, collaboration among companies has been going on. You know, you can go back to 1992 with the first data co-ops. So it's not new. It's more penetrated in the US market, but overwhelmingly, the marketers that responded said, yep, this is something we need to do. And very few are saying, no, we're not going to do this, and we're never going to do this. So let's kind of dive into some of the definitions that will help to give us that framework. So the first, we ask people, to define data and identity and what's the difference, and we've probably got 100 different answers. Ultimately, data is the attribute that joined together may represent an identity. And a part of identity is this effort to recognize and understand the individual audience member, whether that's a customer, a prospect, a visitor, et cetera. And we need to understand what they're doing, follow that customer journey across the channels, across the devices, so that, again, we can have relevant, meaningful communication. But data and identity are not the same thing. So that's kind of a first point. First-party data, on the other hand, thrown around as a term, is data that a brand or media owner has collected with permission from the consumer. This is a direct customer relationship between that brand or media owner and that consumer. That makes it first party. Third-party data is information that is indirectly collected. It's data collected by an entity that doesn't have that direct relationship. It's why we call it third party. So if we can settle and say, all right, we agree with those basic definitions, then we get to second party. And second party, we got a whole bunch of answers yet again. So is it another brand's first party data acquired through some other service or platform? Is it another brand's first party data acquired directly from that brand? Those are licensing. That doesn't seem right to us. Is it data that's shared between brands and publishers? Multiple definitions. We came out and settled on one that said, all right, look, second party data is data that is shared in a dedicated environment with a clearly defined set of permissions and rights. I can share it for insights. I can share it for measurement. I can share it for attribution. I can think about activating it. But if I license that, if I commercialize that data, it changes. It becomes third party data because I've lost that direct relationship with the consumer. So one of the things that we tried to establish in our research and the white papers that we wrote was, what is the definition of identity of first, second, and third? And second party is about three things. It's about permission. What permissions have been established between the consumer or customer and the participants? Provenance, what permissions were granted? Understanding and being able to visualize that chain of permission. And governance, which is managing this. This is a partnership within a brand between IT, marketing, compliance. And across brands, those groups have to come together. So we need to think about what is the governance of data that allows us to keep data in a second party state. So given all that, what defines an identity solution? Again, identity resolution is a process that takes data and attributes and blends it together to link so that we get a persistent recognition of audience members across the devices and across the touch points. So it's those set of solutions, but they're not just limited to the resolution, the creation of a graph. There are multiple ways to think about that. So a couple of them. The first case that everybody thinks about is, okay, my first party graph inside my personalization unowned, first party base, whether it's first party data, first party cookies, and it's also what the walled gardens do. It's proprietary ID based on authenticated first party data which an owner can use and has certain permissions to do. A second, and we've seen this coming from companies like LiveRamp, the Trade Desk and others, a common ID based on a first-party data match to a PII-based reference data set. So this is that deterministic, frankly, very heavily dependent on email right now. But this is a second approach to ID. We also have seen common synonymous ID tokens, like an ID5 and others have, which are designed really to facilitate programmatic trading in the bid stream. So they're a much narrower use case, but then it kept going. So we have second-party data environments based on whether it's clean rooms or whatever the terminology you're going to use, with anonymous ID linking, seen across partner models, heavily in programmatic, but not just in programmatic. We also see these in advanced TV. We're not seeing it quite as frequently in personalization on own. Stepping back one more level, removed from that individual, we're looking at a household ID based on IP address and geomatch, used frankly across all of the different ecosystems. And then not specifically an ID solution, but contextual targeting. Where does this fit? And the deeper we go into keyword and page-based semantics and we add advanced machine learning, how does context sit with or separate from the other IDs? And increasingly important in programmatic and the advanced TV market. So driving down, I started to talk about those second-party environments. There's really three areas that we focus on. Data co-ops, which are offline data collaboration between thousands of B2C and B2B brands, primarily in the US with 4 or 5 big co-ops, Epsilon, Abacus, Oracle Data, which was Datalogix, Wyland, et cetera. Exchanges and marketplaces. And if the co-op started in 1992, exchanges and marketplaces really started around 2010, 2011. And we've seen increasing growth in that market, not just based on third-party data, but as brands want to exchange data with each other. It gave them a way to facilitate that. And then the third view were these technical data environments. These are the third-party technology solutions like a LiveRamp Safe Haven that are for peer-to-peer storage, analysis, linkage, and exchange. Again, terminology in the industry. Lots of people throw around the term clean room. So we asked, a platform where data is exchanged without exposing it directly to either party or the clean room provider. So it can be blind, or that third-party provider can add data to it. They can help manage that. So there are different approaches. Some of these approaches, the data never moves. Other approaches, the data will move to different environments. We did, of course, get the very wonky, it's a controlled environment used in science and manufacturing, where the term came from. Some narrowed it again to just securely matching for data sets, but there were multiple versions and multiple discussions and technologies that fell into this. So the range of approaches: transfer and matching of simple hash email data and matching fully pseudonymized data sets. Companies like InfoSum, LiveRamp, again, very active in the sector. A key difference among these solutions are, does the data move or does it not move? And we are seeing an increase in both the focus and adoption in that area as security and compliance says, hey, maybe we're a regulated industry and it can't move. I still want to be able to take a look and I need to be able to partner. Sometimes matching and extracting can be performed within the environment. Sometimes you can add noise to the data and therefore obfuscate it. But what we really saw was we saw the popularity start in the GDPR territories because they had to partner to get that scale, to get that reach. But we've seen it come rapidly into the US market. We did ask, of these collaboration solutions, which one? For the most part, companies are using clean rooms, they're using exchanges, they're using these environments, they're leveraging it, and they're not leveraging just one, they're leveraging multiple. Okay, as I move towards, what comes next, the very first thing is, look, first party data, it doesn't matter which approach you're thinking about, but it's really at the heart of all of the identity and data collaboration solutions that we see in the market today. Whether it's personalization, programmatic, and we're going to see these ecosystems continue to merge, especially programmatic and the world of advanced TV, CTV, OTT, and linear. So again, it's a merger, but first-party data at its core. We're thinking about multi-level permissioning. So how do you track consent between the consumer and the brand to brand, brand to media owner? How do you define what's possible? So as permission and that value exchange starts to crystallize, this becomes increasingly important, and it will evolve, because it has to evolve, because brands are going to increase, their first-party data collection. They're going to think about their loyalty programs. They're going to think about how do they build their own first-party identity graph, or if they don't have the scale, who can they partner with to help them build that out? And we think that we are very much in the early innings of what's possible, and it takes time, because you have to think about your marketing approach. You think use case first, and then you think about, okay, what do I need to do to solve for that? At the same time, it's a bit of a moving target because the regulatory changes. We're not done at CPRA, and we're not done at GDPR. In all likelihood, 2022, not 2021, could see some national regulation. In the meantime, we have multiple states that are pushing their own interpretation of what you can and cannot do. So as you are trying to decide, what should I use? Who should I work with? The landscape keeps shifting. We do think that there will be more multi-party partnering. All of those components that I spoke about earlier, this is increasing. On the media owner side, between big, especially in the middle, the longer tail, they have to figure out what is their solution, because they're never going to have the scale and the reach, and they do not want to be excluded from the marketplace. 3 more things we're thinking about. Yes, Google Flocks and the privacy sandbox. Google has come out, they've made announcements, they will continue to make announcements. They are now testing Flock in the US, but wait, they had to put it on pause in Europe. And is it really a broad-based market approach? What are we thinking about as we view sparrows and turtle doves and every other kind of bird that flies through this particular marketplace? So we've got to watch all of that. We have to watch the organizations, coming out and thinking back over the last 25 years, we've seen convergence within the organization, but we're also really starting to see more steering committees, the role of the chief data officer in bringing together those focused in the world of broadcast with those in the world of digital, with those offline. This is coming together. So there's transformation at the brand level, there's transformation also in the agencies. So we're going to see convergence, but it's slow. These things don't happen overnight. I think netting it out, we expect a very steady transformation and adoption. We think that we are going to be in test for somewhere between 12 and 36 months, certainly through the balance of this year. As everybody, the day the cookie turns off should not be the day you start on this process. What we are being told, what we are seeing in the marketplace is an enormous amount of testing and an acknowledgement that multiple solutions are going to be leveraged. It is not one and done, but there's also how much bandwidth do we have for testing, how much time, what resources, how many things can we test, and then ultimately, how many approaches can we support? So that's the end of my presentation, and I'm going to bring back Jane and stop sharing.
Hey, Bruce, thanks. That was fantastic. I wish we had more time for questions, but because I was talking to myself for the first 3 minutes, we lost a little time there. But I do have just a couple if we could do before the panel. So there's a quick question. Which companies are being surveyed? If you could just answer that.
So across the supply side,
the ones on in your survey that you guys did here.
Survey, it was enterprise and mid-market brands. It was CMOs, VP and above.
Great. So a marketer, a brand focus.
Yeah, and it was across financial services, retail, and multiple other verticals. So we were pretty vertical agnostic in the mix.
Great. And there was also a question about data trusts that you haven't mentioned anything about data trusts, which are being piloted in Europe. Are you familiar with that? Do you have any thoughts?
Is this some of the swans that we're talking about? There are a number of approaches that we are seeing in the market around.
He's saying no. He's saying no. It's not the swans, but.
Okay. All right, but we are seeing a lot of approaches. There's a lot of approaches to consumer adoption, and can we get the consumer to opt in? So maybe that's the topic. Otherwise, I'll take it to the side and we'll go deeper.
Okay, yeah, it's Dan Murphy, so Dan will follow up with you separately.
Yeah.
So I think we should, I don't want to cut the panel off since that's what happened the last time at the summit. So thanks so much, Bruce. And let me just introduce the panel here.
Thank you very much, Jane. I'm going to go and listen to the panelists.
So here's our next panel. If they all want to start to pull up their, turn on their cameras and turn on their audios. As soon as they're all ready here, I will stop sharing this and bring Alice Sylvester, our moderator, up, who will take it away. Alice.
Thanks, Jane. You know, it's really exciting that we get to redo this panel. We kind of were pressed for time. The topic could go on and on. In fact, every time we have one of our prep meetings, we just have a really good time chatting about the state of identity resolution and all the changes that are happening and what it means. And I think I've kind of stopped screaming every time I hear the word identity resolution or pseudonymized data or some of those other data, all the other words that are applying here. I think I'm beginning to figure this out a little bit. There, you will hear from our 4 different companies. I still think there's quite a bit of overlap in the way we talk about identity resolution companies. And so it will be helpful. My first question for my team is to introduce yourself and describe your solution briefly. And then, what is your unique offering? What do you, how do you differentiate a little bit in the industry? So that's my first question. Let's start with Jason from Blockgraph.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Alice. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jason, the CEO of Blockgraph, and a little bit about what we do and where we fit within the industry. We were formed initially by Comcast and spun into an independent partnership in May of last year between Comcast Charter and Viacom-CBS. And from the get-go, our vision has been to create a better, safer, more sustainable TV advertising ecosystem. So we were born out of the need for both collaboration and with a keen understanding and insights into what's going on in the convergent TV ecosystem. So what we provide our customers is an identity operating system that has been purpose-built for that specific ecosystem, convergent TV. Our platform allows companies to establish common connections and a way to exchange securely audience intelligence with their partners on a peer-to-peer basis, whether that is securely exchanging IDs, audience segments, data, insights, so on and so forth, all while retaining the control and ownership of their data. As for where we sit within the overall ecosystem, we sit on a very foundational layer as an underpinning of being able to connect audiences into connected households on an accurate, deterministic basis, and to be able to allow data owners to protect and preserve the confidentiality of their first-party data. So this at the end of the day is really about accelerating the time it takes to bring data into the convergent TV ecosystem. So hopefully that answered in a quick time, Alice. So I'll pass back to you.
And it's set-top box data. Do you have any ACR data?
Well, so we don't sit on data. Again, we provide an ID operating system to companies who have data. So some of those customers who have data would be MSOs in our network who have deterministic understanding of first-party data. Some of it is identity service providers who have data, ID graphs of sorts, and some is brands, clients, et cetera. So we provide a common technology that allows these companies to directly interact amongst themselves without having to work through a common intermediary.
Okay. Excellent, thank you. Matthew from LiveRamp.
Hi, Alice, and everybody. Thank you very much. So just to introduce myself briefly, my name is Matthew Emans. I am VP of products, the measurement products for LiveRamp. And, as we start to talk about identity, it's probably worth just thinking a little bit about how I got to be at LiveRamp. So I was previously co-founder of a company called Data Plus Math that launched really one of the first attribution platforms specifically tailored towards TV. And you can think about if you're trying to do attribution in TV, that is connecting exposures back with outcomes, whether they be offline or online outcomes. The most important thing is to be able to connect that exposure through identity to the outcomes taken by the same individuals or households. And so, we joined LiveRamp a year and a half ago. And really, this is because Data Plus Math either had two options, either partner for identity or try to build our own. And LiveRamp's leading solution in this space really allows that connection to occur. And so, when you think about LiveRamp more broadly, we think about ourselves as a data connectivity platform, not just about identity, but about being able to connect data securely and privately between different private ecosystems. And so we've built a core set of identity capabilities and an unparalleled network that enable companies and their partners to better connect, control, and activate data between these various customer experiences and generate more valuable business outcomes. And so that is based on both a neutral infrastructure for identity that allows people to interoperate between different companies and different addressability solutions, but also the safe control and ability to keep that data in the same place, have a brand or have a publisher maintain control and permissions on top of their data.
Great, thank you. Aimee, could you introduce yourself and briefly talk about Experian's role in the universe? But maybe because I know it's so broad, perhaps you might want to talk about the television. Kind of screen it through to the television aspects of our lives.
Sure, absolutely. Hi, Alice. It's good to be back. I'm Aimee Irwin. I lead strategy and partnerships for Experian Marketing Services. Experian is most known as a credit bureau. At Experian Marketing Services, we're really helping brands leverage the power of data and technology to connect with consumers and understand consumers. We have products across data, activation, identity, and measurement. We have been working in the data-driven TV space for a very long time. We've been known for our safe haven, our privacy-friendly matching capabilities that support the ability for marketers to connect their first-party data to both Experian data, other third-party data, and then activate that data across channels and measure across channels. So we've been providing those identity solutions that enable that data-driven TV for many years, largely based on our strong offline PII. As many of you know, we recently acquired TapAd, which is a leader in digital identity resolution. And that was really to enhance our digital identity capabilities. I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about the convergence that's happening with digital video and connected TV and data-driven linear. And we really believe that Tapad's data and technology assets help us better support cross-channel marketing for our customers, which is increasingly important. It offers the ability for us to create new products and services off our combined assets. And also another topic I'm sure we'll talk a lot about is it helps our clients navigate the new cookieless world by supporting interoperability across the many alternative solutions that are emerging. And I can talk a little bit about some of those products as well as we go further in the panel. I want to be conscious of time.
Great, thank you. Nick, you're new because our friend Richard isn't here today. So please tell us a little bit about InfoSum. Just, introduce yourself and how does InfoSum, I know you're slightly different, but I know that you are a data connecting company. So 2 out of the 3 companies or 3 out of the 4 companies we're talking about are data connecting companies, right? Anyway, take it away, Nick.
Thanks, Alice. Yeah, Nick Halstead, founder of InfoSum. I've been building data companies for over 20 years. I revolutionized the social media data space for 12 years with my company DataSift, and decided that I wanted to change this market by giving everyone else the power of Facebook and Google by creating a decentralized solution, allowing every company to work together. InfoSum is a next generation of identity and data company using, as I say, decentralization to allow data collaboration without the need to centralize or share any raw data. And that's what's unique, the non-sharing. We invented this concept of non-movement of data, allowing companies to combine knowledge without the need for an ID or for any transfer or movement of data. That's been our challenge in this industry. Too much data percolating around the industry, too many ID graphs being shared and leaked. And our goal is to make it so no one has to move any of that around. So we don't own any data, we don't sell any data, we don't have a form of identity ourselves. We're a zero ID solution. In our world, we supply this thing we call a data bunker, which is becoming lovely, a kind of an industry way of talking about this, a data bunker to allow customers to build their own trusted, decentralized ecosystems without the need for a universal ID, which is a terrible idea, having universal IDs. So we use the customer's own first-party data, their own identity to build their own kind of virtual data bus to bring any number of companies together. What's important is we're agnostic. We work with everyone, with any identity type. We sit across these other old kind of centralized ID solutions and give our customers the ability to pick and choose how they work across those solutions.
Okay, excellent. I think I'm getting this now. Okay, so we know how much this space is evolving and changing. And like Jane said, every week, every day, there's new stuff, attention being focused on the identity resolution space. And I have a feeling that so much of this is out of our control that we'll just be in this reactive mode for a really long time. And I love what Bruce said about marketers experimenting with multiple solutions for the next 12 to 36 months. I think we're going to be in this period of exploration for a while. Aimee, let me ask you though, how are you approaching some of these solutions like the ones that Bruce were talking about, like IP authentication, collaborative data sharing, the sandboxes, the flocks, contextual, and the ever popular universal IDs that Nick just talked about how great they are? Just kidding.
Sure. Yeah, Bruce outlined a number of key points. Obviously, the importance of first-party data is critical. The ability for that first-party data to be able to be leveraged across the many devices, which gets to what's going on with third-party cookies and restrictions and IDFAs and how many alternative solutions are coming to market. I think he noted that there's an increase in interest in additional solutions. There's going to be a lot of trialing. We believe that too, and ultimately, there's marketers are going to try a lot, and not one solution is going to fit going to fit all, if you will. Marketers are expecting to use multiple solutions. Experian, we, along with Tapad, are focused on supporting the interoperability of those solutions, and there's many different IDs. Tapad recently launched a product called Switchboard. Switchboard is a module that sits within the Tapad identity graph and uses machine learning to find connections between these newer IDs and more traditional digital identifiers, such as mobile devices, connected TV IDs, IP addresses, hashed emails, which are becoming increasingly important. We launched Switchboard with more than 10 partners, including Unified ID 2.0. And we expect that, to grow as we see more alternative solutions come to market. In addition to Switchboard, which focuses more on the interoperability of identifiers, we're also seeing that marketers are taking a closer look at how they link their first-party data and how they do that in a privacy-compliant way. And increasingly, that means not sharing data. And I think, obviously Nick alluded to this. What that's led to is really a focus on these data collaboration environments, or clean rooms, as Bruce noted. So at Experian, we're expanding on the decades of experience that we have providing a fully managed clean room capabilities as a data and service provider, to include both self-service and hybrid service clean room options within a cloud-based, privacy-friendly, PII-free environment. That allows clients to perform their own analytics for measurement, insights, audience creation across first, second, and third-party data assets. And all combined with our audience management platform, those customers will inherit the ability to distribute these audiences across offline and online channels. And then finally, we've also partnered with our credit bureau on a marketing analytics sandbox that allows our financial services clients to obtain the freshest data to customize and deploy their marketing campaigns. And that's, of course, data across Experian.
It seems to me, I'm adjusting this to the rest of the team, it seems to me that if you don't have really deep pockets, you can't play in this field anymore. So that's my one observation. My second observation is, and I tend to love gross generalizations. How's that for qualification? I love gross generalizations. I have a feeling, my experience has been that first-party data generally sucks. And what effort are we going to make, or how do we even begin to talk about, the strength of the first-party data that everybody seems to be relying on, or that is the linchpin to the solutions going forward? I know there are two questions in there.
Yeah. So Alice, maybe I can jump in there for a second. I guess a couple of things. One, to pick up on those points, this is going to continue to be a fragmented space. And, I think we just all have to recognize this. Aimee pointed this out, and just to pick up on this, like an important thing that we've been able to do, and we see as an important point going forward, is that there isn't going to be a single solution that rules all of these things. And there isn't going to be a single universal ID that crosses all of these boundaries. And so, interoperability is really important, so that you can connect, subject to permissions that everybody wants to establish about the use of their own data, but you want to be able to connect one marketer's own first-party data to the understanding of identity that a particular publisher has. And so you mentioned that in a lot of cases, a marketer's own first-party data is fragmented, or maybe not complete, or is needs augmenting to really make it work. And so that's where we think something like the Abilitech asset comes into play and enables us to fill in those pieces, both of offline and online identity, and strengthen that understanding of who the individual is, how they're connected into a household or connected with other individuals. And it allows us to then connect those data points with something that we might have on a publisher or another marketer to enhance that collaboration, or sense of being able to share identity, share data, again, subject to different permissions.
Yeah,
it doesn't really need to be fragmented, though. There is Facebook. People advertise on Facebook because not because it's a great place to put advertising, because it's just one central, an addressable audience of 3 billion plus people. That's the reality of why the money goes to them, goes to Google. There's no reason, it's just a technology challenge of why tens of thousands of companies should be joined together in a universal way. You know, that to me is, it's not about fighting amongst ourselves, it's about increasing the market share of addressable and first party data, so that money moves from Google and Facebook to the independent ecosystem to make that larger. And it's only fragmented because the technology up to now has been rubbish.
So Alice, I want to go back to your point around the quality of first party data. I don't know that it's actually the quality of first party data that is lacking so much as the scale and the applicability of that first party data to the endpoints. The brands and clients have very accurate understanding of their customer. It just so happens that they have that data in a form that is hard to connect at scale with some of the media companies that they're trying to buy against or measure against. And I think that in that environment where they have limited scale and they want to get more precise, every single match matters, every single connection matters with their partners. So having the accuracy and the ability to connect that with the supply side is really, really important. So I think I would perhaps argue that it's not the quality of first party or third party. I think there's quality of both of those two types of data, so much as the scale, and the scale of third party is just much higher today, at least here in the US, than the scale of first party. The second piece that I want to just go back on the fragmentation is, let's just replay the last 2 weeks alone. You got Google announcing that they're not going to build a cookie alternative and they don't want other people to build it. You've got Trade Desk coming back out, Jeff Green's post saying, this is great news for the open internet. Connected TV on Digiday is mentioning how they're having its own identity crisis with the IP address in doubt. NBCU launching a new initiative this past 2 months or 2 weeks ago ahead of the upfronts around its own proprietary ID and its own clean room powered by Snowflake. And then you've got other people talking about how all these ID graphs are now learning to talk to each other. There's been a lot of movement in the last 2 weeks. So we're all admittedly on very evolving, rapidly evolving ground when it comes to audience targeting and data. So what we see, and I think many on the panelists would agree with this, is that there's going to be a rise of data silos, and not just amongst the tech platforms, but amongst media companies. And each one of these will have their own universal ID. So these IDs are going to need to be connected with the brand. There are competing cookie-based replacements with authenticated solutions, ATS on the LiveRamp side. You've got Trade Desk UID2, others that are emerging. So there's another variety of email-based authentication solutions that need to work. And while there is general consensus that IP will be used less and less with CTV, it's admittedly the main connective agent in the industry, and it underpins that industry today. So it's in the future, in the coming 2 years, we've got to have a system that can support both movement and non-movement, because the reality is the industry has to continue to operate as these policies change, as the industry evolves. And having that flexibility is, I think, going to be key. And really, that's where we're focused on, kind of providing that flexibility to the whole ecosystem.
This might be a really stupid question, but given the complexity and given the amount of change that's occurring and given the amount of energy being devoted in this space, what kind of training and personnel issues have we wrought on ourselves as an industry? Nobody went into marketing thinking that they were going to know the relative merits of someone's ID graphs and how to combine all their different ID graphs, right? We didn't go into marketing with that. So what kind of support, what kind of people are there? What kind of support? How does anybody figure this out? I know that's an off-road question, kind of briefly.
I mean, I think we're seeing a large disparity with marketers, with clients, and how prepared they are for the changes that are coming. on, I think when you see some of the larger, more sophisticated marketers that have had large troves of data for many, many years, they're in a much better position. They have, some of the retailers that have developed retail networks, they have invested over the years in internal capabilities around these things. Whereas I would say the vast majority of marketers have not. And they are relying on the expertise of, and the leadership of folks like the IAB and others to help them navigate through this. But because we do see a very large disparity, I didn't see it in Bruce's findings, but I have seen it in other studies.
Yeah, I think it's a whole different issue. Matt, I think I want to ask this question. In television and going across television and digital with interoperability, we address this issue of the household versus the individual. And, how do we resolve identities to the household or the individual level? And what do you think is right for planning, targeting, buying, and activation? And is there anything different in television measurement that we need to think about for at that level of granularity and that level of resolution?
Sure. And so, I mean, we're all here as a television first audience talking about identity. And I think it's important to take a step back and think that, what is important from an identity standpoint in television is probably different than what we're all used to in the digital programmatic ecosystem. So at least in my household, my wife's email address is probably what's on our Hulu account. And when we get served ads, we've got bits of fragmented identity against her email, except for I'm sitting down with the kids or whatever to watch a program. And so I think it's important, because of the way TV has operated for so long, to be able to recognize that so many of these addressability options and also the resulting measurement are centered around screens in the home that don't have a single identity associated with them. And so you need to reconstruct that version of a household that we're all used to thinking about in TV, and allow that household to be not just defined by sort of traditional offline assets or who's logged in, but contextually based on who may be in front of the device. So it's important to understand who all those individuals are and be able to understand how that household is constructed and tie the exposures in that household back together with the outcomes that may be, so when you think about, my wife's maybe logged into that Hulu account and I see an ad on my Comcast box, and then, ultimately somebody else makes a purchasing decision in the household. And we got to put all those pieces back together in one household in order to tie all of those dots back together. And so, both PII-based understandings of homes, as well as IP and CTV authentication, all of those signals need to be put back together into the definition of the household, so that we can recover what we've gotten from Nielsen for so long about a true understanding of reach and frequency for homes that, marketers and their agencies have come to rely on for so long.
I have to admit that this is where my head explodes. I think I could argue and have argued that the household is more important than individuals. And yet then we start talking about digital and digital devices, and that's all individuals in that household. But the complexity of putting them together just makes my head explode. In case you're wondering.
Well, I mean, I think for TV, identity resolution has, as pointed out, has typically been at the household level. And as we think about the evolving privacy and regulatory landscape, you sort of think we may see a flight to less individual resolution and more households or groups of households or cohorts. And I think, those of us with more of a digital background think, wow, that's not one-to-one targeting. That's going to leave a lot of holes. But it's a lot better than, what we've had. If you think about the history of TV advertising and the many, many years of targeting based on a panel-based demos, we're still very far ahead of that, even if you're talking about the household level. agreed. There's huge measurement issues with trying to determine linking those purchases back to the household. But I do think we're going to have to. It's not only going to be to think about TV in terms of digital, but you're going to have to thinking about more of a convergence there and less of a one moving to the other, if that makes sense.
Right. Well, so much of the work we do in this industry is going to be about matching first-party data to publisher data, matching publisher data to other data. How should we think about match rates, match accuracy across these disparate data sets? What do people need to know? What do people need to think about match rates besides, or match accuracy and questions like that? Jason, I want to start this off with you. What do you think the issues are and how we should think about match accuracy, just the match rates?
Sure. I think where Aimee was going is actually a good way to start this conversation off, in that if you think about what you're trying to accomplish, are you trying to stitch together, match together outcomes? So that's a different type of scenario for matching. Or are you trying to stitch together impressions? Or are you trying to apply an audience? Each of these things are different when it comes to connecting the audience between two parties, or matching. So the way I think about matching is, for the onboarding, you're really trying to get as close to your distribution partner, so a more direct match for onboarding as possible, because that is a direct match. Now, that's going to rely on you to have some common signal between you and your distribution partner if you're a client. And in many cases, that doesn't exist. So the distribution partner might have email, but likely they don't. So that's where a third party comes in to really help that out. So I think different distributors have different ID signals. If you think about the MSOs, they have a very accurate understanding of PII, IP, so on and so forth. If you think about publishers, they have sometimes logged in users, getting better, but limited state. And then if you think about brands, it's going to be a combination of email, device ID, etc. So, and some of it's individual, some of it's household. So it really boils down to, what are you trying to match? And then who do you want to match with? And depending on that, it's going to be either at the household or at the individual level. And match rate is a bit of a moving target depending on what you're trying to accomplish. But obviously the higher the better, because it helps you maximize the scale of an outcome. So that's kind of how I would describe it. I know it's an esoteric question, but matching in and of itself, while a scientific process, why you use it is quite esoteric.
Right. I want to ask the rest of the team, are you asked about things like match accuracy, match rate? How do you handle those kind of questions? How prevalent are those kind of questions?
Yeah, Alice, I guess, we see this all the time, and I'm afraid I have to echo Jason's answer. It's not something where you can say, hey, well, I've got a 78% recall rate on matches or something like that, because it really depends on, are we trying to target as many individuals as we can, or are we trying to find the most deterministic match for measuring an outcome? And so I think it's important, I would say, two things for folks who are trying to consume identity and matches. And one is to understand, how you can work with your identity or match provider to tune the workflows and matching to your use cases. So are you working on measurement? Are you working on activation? Are you working at a household level? Are you working in individuals? All those things are important, and it's not a one size fits all, but also to understand the bias that may be introduced as part of the matching process. We know that different individuals, different homes, different viewing has different levels of what we think about as visibility, or different sort of sub-match rates in the process. So you can imagine that CTV might have a different match rate than MVPD homes, for example, in Jason's graph. And it's important to understand that when you then do a match to do measurement, that you have skewed your results as a result, as a part of that matching process.
Great. Nick, I think we may be very close to the last question. Are you future proofing, or are you pretty comfortable with your, with the solution that you have right now with data, that doesn't move? I know you don't have the data, that you have the tech that underlies a lot of this stuff. What would you say you're doing to future proof yourself for the crazy amount of change that's likely to continue happening here?
Yeah, and I hope we are more future proofing for our customers. There's clearly a lot of challenges out there. Google's news, they seem pretty dead set against, and it's understandable. They're dead set against, new IDs being in the bid stream. That's really what they don't like. The fact is, we went from an ecosystem of third-party cookies, which were never designed to be in the bid stream, and are pretty, run amok, that anyone can collect the data off the back of those IDs. Moving to a hashed email is probably only a temporary solution. We need something for the market to be able to continue to operate, but European regulators are already looking at this, and the idea that the consumer would be happy to know that you took away a cookie which was, let's face it, disappeared after 7 days, and moved to a hashed email that now every party in the ecosystem can track every bit of data, is not good for the advertiser. And what we hear from all the advertisers is, if I'm a massive brand and I want to activate 1 million users, the last thing I want to know is all those hashed email identifiers end up at the DSP, and now the DSP knows the whole of the audience of that advertiser, and that's what we spend all day solving for. So I think looking forward, what the future proofing is for me, to me, all forms of fingerprinting will be gone, IP will be gone. We need to move to a model where advertisers and publishers can connect over their identity. No one in between has any right to that data. And we need to, move to that, so the consumer is also a part of that triangle of trust between the three. So, I see the world's going to have to resolve back to having smaller addressable audiences, work across different identity vendors, which, we sit across, and start to think about how you audience expand between known and unknown, because that's the reality. Suddenly in 9 months' time, you're only going to have, at best 20% reach into known. And obviously only premium publishers probably will ever get to even that percentage. And therefore you need some kind of attribute modeling and a lot of permissioning to allow that to happen, by the way, because you can't just suddenly expand an audience and expect to advertise to people that don't know that they're being targeted. So there's a lot of challenges. And then last is, I think identity is going to move into flock-based connectivity. So it's not just about ID here and ID here. It's thinking about a modeling of an audience, connecting that model of an audience over there, connecting to another model of an audience over there. So there'll be other flock-based identifiers that are more, I call it, it's kind of attribute-based modeling, which is really what flock is taking a group of users and turning them into a model of their behavior from a privacy standpoint. So that to me is the future, and that, that's what we give to our customers.
I think about that every night when I watch television, and I think about what flock am I going to be in? Am I going to be in one based on one television viewing behavior or one Amazon purchase? Or is there somewhere going to be a point where I am a little bit more multidimensional than that, or my household is a little bit more multidimensional? So as a
bragging rights for what flock you're a member of.
Well, I don't want to be in dumb ones, I don't want to be in old-fashioned ones and stuff like that. I want to be in cool ones. So I do think it's kind of a complicated issue, what happens to us from a targeting perspective. Last question, and I know that Jane will come in here with the audience questions, but last question, what about this? I'm so sorry, this sounds so silly. What about television? Are there unique risks about the television world right now that make your world more complicated, or that you see on the horizon coming up for TV? Anything different? Not interoperability, not digital, just straight up TV.
We're talking about IP addresses.
I'm sorry, Matt.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that a big risk for the industry's rapidly been building activation, addressability, and measurement on top of CTV IP addresses. And we believe that through a combination of regulatory and other forces, that IP addresses are going to become not okay in a period of time. I don't know if that's 9 months, 18 months, 3 years, but we certainly think that we have to build for the future, and that essentially the use of IP addresses as a primary anchor point for matching and for identity in TV it needs to evolve. We LiveRamp obviously are leading heavily into publisher-based authentication, so that we don't have to rely on IP addresses, but I think it's a thing that we all need to be aware of in TV. And I'm sorry, Jason, I cut you off.
No, that's okay. I think Matt had a very astute point, and I agree with him. I think the timing is the big question there around the future of IP. I think what people who don't live, breathe TV, which most of us on this call do, is that TV distribution is fundamentally different than digital distribution. And I think not understanding that, marketers and agencies could get into a lot of trouble in terms of their data strategies. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the traditional linear, which yes, admittedly is shrinking, but it is still a vast majority of TV viewing today, the distributor, the party who owns the data, who has the direct relationship, who actually understands who's watching the screen, is not the publisher. So there is inherent kind of complexity and collaboration that's necessary to be able to understand that audience, to apply the audience, and then subsequently to measure that audience at the household level. So I think if brands are looking to just do email to email based solutions, that's not going to work in television. So I think having that understanding of the unique nature of distribution, people could get into a lot of challenge if they don't have the right solution set in place.
Awesome. Jane, it's 4:15.
Alice, I'm been monitoring the Q&As here. I'm sorry, the questions. You guys are going to provide the answers. There's one I think you've already addressed, really having to do with IP address. It's what becomes the incentive to run OTT programmatically versus direct with the upcoming reset of targeting and measurement in digital, and if when IP addresses get labeled as PII. Do you get that? Do you understand the question? Does anyone, the incentive to run OTT programmatically, if all the targeting and measurement is going to change, and if IP address, becomes an issue?
Yeah, I guess I would say that if we do our job right, which is to enable a world in which identity can be applied by the publisher based on their first party understanding of who the user is, and selectively permission the sharing of that identity either only internally for direct sold inventory or through their programmatic partners, then the difference won't be there. There's not a problem with an incentive, right? So if we, the technology providers, make this interoperable and make collaboration work correctly and allow the permissioning and controls, then we don't have a problem here.
Okay, well, thanks, you guys. I think that there's one more question for Nick, but I think Nick is typing a response to that, so that's good. Thank you, Nick. And by the way, thank you very much. Nick is in the UK, as a couple of our panelists on our next panel are also in Europe. So thank you guys so much. I think, we'll probably have to do this again in a couple more months.
Let's do it every 2 months. What's going on now? It would be great.
But really, thank you all so much. This has been really valuable, really great insights. So really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
So then I think what we're going to do now is I'm going to move to our last panel here. I'll introduce Jon Watts from the Project X Institute, or the TV Data Initiative. And he'll introduce his panelists. So if all of you could take yourselves off of video, unmute yourselves and turn on your video. And I will get this off the screen and take it away.
Great, thank you, Jane, and thank you, Alice, and the previous panel for a really fascinating discussion. And many thanks to CIMM for hosting this event and for inviting us to take part. So as Jane mentioned, my name's Jon Watts. I'm the Executive Director and co-founder of the Project X Institute, which is a brand new industry think tank specializing in media, tech, and advertising. We're just launching at the moment, and I'm really delighted to be here from the other side of the Atlantic and looking forward to the discussion. I also wanted to briefly introduce the TV Data Initiative, which, as Jane mentioned, is a brand new industry initiative that launched earlier today. The focus of the initiative is very much on supporting the growth and development of the new TV data ecosystem. So when Jane invited us to take part, we were really delighted. This entire session has been very much on point for some of the issues that we're planning to explore in more detail over coming months. We've got quite an ambitious program of work ahead of us, and are really hoping to make a positive contribution to the industry. The founding members include a really unique collection of companies from across the TV data ecosystem. We have Dish Media, Blockgraph, TransUnion, TruOptik, MadHive, TVSquared, Eyeota, and Videoamp all taking part. And I'm especially delighted to have 4 of the founding members, or representatives of 4 of the founding members, participating on today's panel. So the previous session, in my mind, was very much about solutions and about where the industry is at in solving for the problems. I think for this panel, we want to deep dive a bit more into some of the use cases and the practical realities of executing against some of the opportunities enabled by identity resolution in the TV market. So without further ado, let's get our panel lined up and starting. So I thought we might start with Kristina, only my grounds that she's on the other side of the Atlantic with me, and it's an hour later for you. So Kristina, do you want to just introduce yourself briefly and give us a sense, just a few opening remarks on why you think identity resolution is becoming so important for the TV advertising industry in the 2020s? What is it really facilitating and enabling that's so important?
Sure. So great to be here. Kristina Prokop is my name. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Eyeota. We're a company that's focused on an audience technology company that's focused on the intelligent use of data. We offer a set of data solutions and services that onboard, enrich, and activate both first-party and non-first-party data across the ecosystem. So I think it's a really exciting part of the evolution of identity resolution, which, coming off of all the developments we've seen in all the other digital channels, it's this, what everyone's been working towards, this holy grail of finally being able to understand the connectivity between the information we're seeing offline and online. So tying all these, we're finally getting to a point, and I think as we saw from the commentary before, and we're sure we'll be underlining the same things here, there's still a long way to go in terms of making this all reality and extremely streamlined and efficient. But the opportunities that it opens up are really, really groundbreaking for marketers. So I think it's just, it's finally this connecting piece that can start connecting online and offline worlds and giving marketers more insight into the attribution of their spend.
It's the promise of a more joined up market, I guess. David from TruOptik, tell us a bit about why this stuff matters.
Hey, so I'm David Wiesenfeld, Chief Strategist of the legacy TruOptik company. We were recently acquired by TransUnion about 6 months ago, as many of you probably know. And So TruOptik was best known for our near census household identity graph that enabled accurate cross-device targeting for OTT at the household level. And what we're doing at TransUnion is combining that household graph with TransUnion's ID capabilities that provide near census person level data that includes both digital and offline. And so the result is sort of this best in class near census level, offline, online, household user level ID graph that can be used for targeting measurement for advanced TV as well as across all addressable media. So why is IDR, identity resolution, so important? As I think Jane alluded to at the beginning, it's the glue that really lets advertisers execute ad campaigns that are consistent in terms of their targeting, coherent in terms of their delivery across many different sources of inventory or even entirely different media channels. And I would just say that the more fragmented a market is, the more complex the user engagement with that channel, like in the case of OTT, where there's many different kinds of screens and operating systems, the more important identity resolution is. And so, I think IDR in many ways is sort of purpose-built for advanced TV, but certainly can apply beyond that.
David, thank you. Bob?
Hey, how are you?
I'm very well, sir. Welcome back. You made it.
Yes.
I mean, you've been active in this space, obviously, with various different companies and currently with TVSquared for some time. Tell us a bit about why this, in your view, this space matters so much.
Yeah, a couple things to start. So yes, Bob Ivins, and I'm Chief Strategy Officer for TVSquared. And for those that don't know TVSquared, we're basically a TV measurement company, and TV is broadly defined as we've been talking about, and measurement is really defined as reach and frequency and as outcomes. And we have a platform, always on, operates in 76 countries, and we do this for a living and been doing it for a while. I think a bunch of points that have already been mentioned. One, TV has been data poor relative to our digital brothers and sisters, for a while. And I think that's all changed now that we have set-top box coming at scale, we have OTT, we have smart TVs, we have streaming services. We're finally been able to neutralize the advantages that digital has had over us. And also, we don't have the concentration that they have. We have, in digital, there's two companies that control 70% of the ad spend. 50% of the total ad spend are controlled by three companies in the digital space. So we need to, use the old Microsoft term, refrag these audiences and bring them back together again. So in our situation, and we'll talk about use cases in a second, our situation is we're collecting passively at scale the right-hand side variables, the marketing variables, and we've been collecting activity data, whether it's websites or whether it's store visits or whether it's transaction data at scale too, and it's connecting them together. And I think David said it exactly. It's the glue, or Jane said it, I missed her part, so I apologize, but it's the glue that's going to bring these two things together. And there's no one size that fits all, and it's going to require, unlike an environment where you've got two companies controlling 70% of the spend, it's going to require partnership. It's going to require us working together. And it's, the reason we joined this initiative that you started, Jon.
I think you summarized it perfectly. And it's that working together piece which feels so important to me, and perhaps we'll come back to that later on. Kemal, my friend, so give us your sense. Obviously, you have a lot of first-party data, so you may have a slightly different perspective, but tell us why identity resolution matters so much.
Thanks, Jon. So I'm Kemal Bokhari. I'm the General Manager of Data and Analytics at Dish Media. For those of you who don't know, Dish Media is the advertising sales division for Dish Network as well as Sling Television. So why it matters, there's 4 or 5 points that I'll make around that. Is the death of a cookie has people rethinking how we gather info on consumers and how we designate attribution. Being able to aggregate information to build personas so brands can easily target their desired audience is important. And identity graphs make that possible. Identity resolution has become increasingly important as fragmentation continues to increase. We know that people move across devices, mobile devices, desktops, connected TVs throughout the day. Without really understanding who's using which device, marketers aren't able to control the messaging to users. as they continue through the customer journey on different devices. And finally, identity resolution works by connecting all available data points, which includes those collected by first-party data, second-party, and/or third-party, as we have talked about earlier during this panel. And this way, we get the full 360-degree view of identity. And this is where Dish really excels and is a kind of a pioneer in this, and we are way ahead of everybody else, is because, as you said, John, the robust first-party data that we have in our disposal.
Kemal, thank you. That's a great show of hands to get the ball rolling. So I thought we might start, possibly controversially, by saying something nice about the digital industries. It's a kind of common habit in our industries to knock digital wherever possible, often for decidedly good reasons. But I guess the inescapable fact during the course of the last decade is that digital advertising has grown at a rate that's outpaced any other medium, accounting for an enormous proportion of total growth in ad spend during the last 10 years. And underpinning that clearly, at least in part, is the power of the medium and the data it provides, and the ability to resolve and associate intentions with behaviors and outcomes and so on and so forth, in often quite sophisticated ways. Kristina, I thought we should start with you on this one. What, if anything, can the TV industry really learn from digital about identity resolution? Obviously, there are lots of things we might want to avoid, but are there positive things we should take away from the experience of digital into the TV market of the 2020s?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you make a good point. We all, it's very easy to be negative about a lot of things, but if you look at the progress that we've made as an industry over the last decade over the last 2 decades, and it's quite amazing. And if you look at the evolution of IDR and people-based marketing over the last 10 years, and the progress that it's made, and again, like I said in the beginning, is what has it shown us is that which it has shown us that we are getting better and better at connecting these dots and making sure that all these channels work in unison. Again, still, this is always a work in progress. I think that's, I similarly get frustrated sometimes when people, say, well, it doesn't work. But, I feel like, if you look at every year in progression, things are getting, things continue to improve, and we're getting closer and closer to where we all want to be as an industry. I think, and this is also why I founded a company in the data space, is I think, whether you're looking at data or IDR, the real beautiful part about this is the first thing that can connect all those channels together, because otherwise you're looking at siloed delivery channels. So I think that is a really exciting result that came out of the development of all the advancement in people-based marketing and IDR over the last 10 years. I think what we can definitely learn is privacy has to be taken front and center from the get-go, because we all know, I think that's something that kind of got hitched into quite at the end of the last 10 years. I think everyone is very clear that now building with privacy at the core of any solution is important. What we've also learned is, what we heard a lot about in the last panel is making sure that there's flexibility and interoperability built into these platforms, because even the world that we see today in terms of our testing and what IDs we're working with and how all these channels fit together, in a year and a half from now, and 3 years from now, they could all look very different again. So it's really about, and I would say the big takeaway is building these solutions for flexibility and planning, and really starting to test and plan ahead.
David, I know you have views on this one. Anything to add before we jump on quickly?
Well, as far as, where Kristina kind of left off, and I know this was alluded to in the last panel, I think that the ability to sort of work across these different identity, universal identity identifiers is sort of a misnomer, right? Because they have this sort of like emerging set of silos of different IDs. And I think it's going to be really important for advertisers to be able to, kind of have a place to go that will work across these different IDs, kind of an umbrella identifier, which is sort of where like a TransUnion sees itself playing, to be able to have sort of the scale and the depth of identifiers within that graph and sort of the pipes and tech to be able to quickly and adroitly kind of integrate with different identity platforms or different identity graphs and tie them together to kind of almost like a super ID and make them, provide that coherence. It's almost ironic, right? That IDR exists because of the need to provide coherence across sort of a fragmented landscape. And now what we have happening is a fragmentation of identity itself, which is kind of almost defeats the purpose. But there are, and that's what TransUnion is really trying to do, is kind of be that sort of super glue, the real, the Uber puzzle key that allows these different sort of siloed identity solutions to be able to be, efficiently pulled together.
I mean, at some point, there's going to be a very meaningful debate about interoperability and about how we knit together these patchwork quilts in a way that really simplifies and makes it easy to address at scale that fragmentation point.
So, hey, John, just a real quick one on this on simplification, though. I do think, though, we've talked about the advantages that digital has had with data targeting and measurement. But, as a media type, they've made it incredibly easy to sell, to buy, and to execute. And while the TV ecosystem has gotten a lot better and be now data rich, it's still complicated. I mean, trying to do addressable advertising is still a bowl of spaghetti, and it's going to require collaboration. If we can't sort this, we might be, data rich, and we might have platforms to do this, but it's multiple platforms and it's still complicated. We need to solve the simplification issue. And I think, again, going back to the collaboration is going to be required.
And it doesn't have to be that messy and inefficient. There have to be opportunities to work together to simplify. But let's get stuck into the use cases piece, because I think that's what a lot of people are here for. From your point of view, how would you describe the main use cases for ID resolution in the TV space? What are we really practically talking about trying to do?
Well, I mean, advertisers still want to get the right message to the right person at the right time. Like, who do you want to reach and what do you want to do? It's pretty simple. But now that you have audiences that are fragmented, and I never thought I would have said this, back in 1995, 96, 97, where there are thousands of websites out there and there was a couple hundred channels, and now it's kind of, it's been flipped. They still have, the advertiser still wants to solve that very simplistic thing. And we're not going to be able to do it for them unless we're able to pull it back together. The brands don't have the resources to do that themselves. Their agency partners don't have the resources to do it either. It's going to require somebody that plays that intermediate space to be able to get it done. And I think that's the important bit. And going back to, now that advertisers or brands have been weaned on the kind of the attribution that they get from digital, they want it from TV too. So we're going to have to be able to give them the measurement at the back end to say what's working, it's not, and then giving them tools to optimize on the fly in their real time. So I think the use cases are not that different than what they were 20 years ago. It's a lot more complicated TV because it's building on top of technologies that, we're not going to be able to solve these new problems with the old technologies. And I think we need to figure that out relatively quickly if we want to continue to take advantage of the data we have at our disposal now.
And just to build on that, I mean, interoperability and speed is the other thing that has to be there. I mean, you can't take 2 weeks to build an audience because, I mean, the people are used to from Kristina's comments in digital, you do retargeting in 2 seconds, not 2 weeks. And, so, and you're doing, in-campaign course corrections based on effectively real-time measurement and even real-time attribution. I know Bob's company is involved with that. So, you need the pipes, you need the speed. It is a technical problem in that respect. And it's also a problem of cooperation, right? You need these companies to be able to work together. Nobody has everything. And, like just an example, TransUnion has a lot of data, but we're working with Blockgraph to enable, advanced TV targeting across both linear addressable and OTT, because they've got the data that you need in the right format with the right security around it to enable, linear addressable targeting to happen as well. And together we can bring those two pieces together to provide a unified addressable or advanced TV targeting solution. But yes, it's a lot of technical integration, a lot of cooperation, and you need speed and interoperability at kind of the heart of it.
And I think the point that's come up repeatedly is that part of the challenge here is we're not talking about 3 or 4 big platforms. We're talking about multiple linear platforms, streaming services, VOD offerings, smart TVs, a whole plethora of different platforms with different data sets associated with them, and lots of different providers on each platform. Kemal, I guess your way is much simpler than that because you're sitting on a huge first-party data platform. What kind of use cases do you really see for this? Give us a sense of how Dish is using identity to support advertisers.
Yeah, sure. But before I just wanted to kind of comment on the last couple of questions on interoperability. I mean, with Dish Media, we are huge believers of interoperability and openness, and we will continue to preach that into the marketplace. So going to your question, addressable advertising is that specific example. And we've been in the market since 2012. And it's because, as you said, because of the fact that we have robust first-party data. Advertisers, I mean, this is no secret, want to be able to measure their effectiveness of their advertising, and addressable makes that happen. And on the how is that we currently work with several external partners that have identity graph solutions that enable connections between advertisers and publishers. And Matt was talking about one of them, LiveRamp. We have a very deep relationship with LiveRamp and Identity Link, where we are able to line up our first-party data with other data sets and be able to find other devices in that household using their IDL. And which in turn, kind of converts our 9 million addressable homes to, over 10 million devices that we could use to do addressable targeting. Finally, I mean, we have actionable deterministic first-party data for both Dish and Sling. Even though Sling is a digital platform, we do capture robust data there, email address, zip code. And we have also one other thing that we have that others, other than MVPD, is we have robust viewership data on both of these platforms, whether there's a satellite TV or on the Sling app. And again, just to reiterate, we have a very strong foundation due to the fact that we have first-party data.
Kemal made a great point in terms of that's a great use case of identity resolution if people are kind of thinking about how do I really apply this. I mean, for publishers, right? I mean, Kemal also did a great data, great first-party data, but in OTT in particular, there's many devices that are used to access content within a given household, and the publisher doesn't always have the information or the time to stitch that together to create a household entity from this device level log data that they all have, which is phenomenal data. And syncing to an identity resolution partner or working with one can allow them to take this great data and just sort of organize it in a way that makes more sense for activation to an advertiser than it would be without that sort of additional layer added on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, for us specifically, I think, David, you're talking about Sling. We capture all of that. We capture all the devices that is used with that login information. And again, our deep relationship with LiveRamp brings us the capability to connect those data points so that we know how all of these devices fit into that household.
Yeah.
But a brand's going to have to do that 10 times, right? Dish is a huge footprint, but if they want to go to Comcast markets, if they want to go to other markets, they're going to have to do the exact same thing multiple times. So somebody needs to be some sort of harmonizing layer to get that done. And Kemal, you have fantastic data. Like you're right. You've been at this longer than any other MVPD or distributor. So I would expect you guys to have a lead in that environment. But if you put yourself in the brand's perspective, they can solve it for your footprint, but they need to solve it at a broader scale than that. And that's the challenge, I think, because
and Bob, that's a good point. I mean, you're bringing up a very good point, and you're absolutely right. You have ampersand, you have DirecTV, Xandr. So it is fragmented, but
you have Buckeye in Ohio. Don't forget Buckeye.
Yeah, and we are, again, our kind of North Stars with interoperability, openness.
Yep.
We are going to lead. We are going to bring that change that is needed in the marketplace to get everybody to play together nicely.
So just before we move on, Kristina, can I just ask, you've heard a bit of discussion there about some of the use cases, so to speak. Are there use cases you see in digital that you don't think have yet made their way into TV at scale? Or hard to say?
Ones that haven't made, well, I think, yeah, I mean, just because of the data use cases work differently in digital environments now than they do. And again, because of that simplicity of using data across so many endpoints at one time. But I think it's a huge, I think the other thing that excites me about the huge opportunity of data and TV and IDR is because it's not only about connecting the offline data and the first party data, but if you look at all of the data that's out there that is behavioral data, or it's offline companies like Experian, like Equifax, like IRI. I mean, the ability to start connecting all of this into the TV environment is very exciting, and I think also again what the other digital, and I think it's just a matter of time until we get that extension, is what we've been able to do is have buying points where you can book and manage multiple channels at once. And I think it's only a matter of time until that becomes more seamless. I wanted to share a point that I think is really interesting, that I think the digital environment can take away from TV, and I think is actually pretty exciting, is if you look at the idea of not, digital is very, IDR is, and we're talking about other ways to identify here in this group, but if you ask, kind of traditional, not traditional, if you ask a lot of kind of pure digital environments, whether it's mobile or or online channels, so much of it is focused around hashed email. But I think like the really interesting application of what's happening, if you look at things from the TV world, and the idea that, a really privacy compliant, like a consumer friendly way to use data and look at data is at a household level that can be just as, it's not one-to-one, but it's a powerful way to use data assets. I think that's actually something that the other channels can take away from this space, because it's going to get more and more complex to try to connect, with increasing privacy regulations, and with the problematic of trying to connect everything to an identifier. If you look at brands who have massive data assets that could, tell them purchase information by where people live and their loyalty card programs, like starting to look, like rethink, okay, what am I doing with my first party data, and what are the IDs, like what's the IDR I'm using in those channels, and maybe looking at something like household level and geo level, cohort based methodologies of using their first party data as they would in a TV environment. I think that's actually something that's pretty exciting.
That's a little bit like Back to the Future, though. We've been doing cohort marketing for decades. Age and gender was the first step on that. I think, I go back to something I said a long time ago, like activity data, however we define it, is increasingly collected at scale and available in the marketplace. If you go all the way back into scanning data in the 80s, the digital data in the 90s, the mobile phone data in the 2000s, it's out there. I think the challenge is the resolving identity. And I think, Dish is doing a great job in their environment. Comcast is doing a great job in their environment. Amazon's doing a fantastic job in their environment. If we want to pull it together, it was going to require a third party to do that. And I look at what we do. We work with brands. We have tags coming off of their websites. We are collecting the exposure data from multiple sources, whether we're manufacturing ourselves with ad occurrence and viewing data, we're getting CTV data, and we're pulling it together in a privacy protected way using, either, the usual suspects that are here, or, Blockgraph, TransUnion, Experian, even LiveRamp, because we're relatively indifferent to it. I think that's the use case. People want to understand holistically what's happening with their TV spend, and is it driving an outcome? Who did I want to reach in the aggregate? How many did I reach? What's the average frequency? And what was the outcome? And
just to that point, Bob, I mean, there's a sense, to me, it seems that in a way, talking about TV identity resolution is slightly misleading. You're often trying to resolve a TV identity with an identity or a set of indicators or whatever from entirely different sectors, be it digital,
right,
be it footfall in a retail.
Every one of these data sources is sitting in a silo, and we're going to have to pull it together. I mean, we're doing stuff now where your local car dealership advertises, and with the mobile phone, we're seeing if there's foot traffic going into the dealership. So it's a very, very different data source.
David, you offer a data marketplace, don't you?
What Bob is saying is exactly right, but I think it's not just measurement, it's the whole process. It's planning, it's execution, it's measurement. And you just need it. It's kind of simple, right? To think, at least schematically, to think about it, you need, on one side, you need kind of all this data that describes people that you can use for advanced targeting, demographics, interests, behaviors, whatever that is, privacy compliant, of course. On the other side, you need kind of the information about the household, what devices are there, just the technical, how do I reach that household? Well, it's going to be through the devices that they have that are TV, that receive TV. In the middle of that, you need this thing that can sort of take at scale in an accurate way, kind of resolve and sort of twist the consumer data to match the identity data, that device data that's linked to households, so that hey, I know about the households that I want to reach that are in my target. I'm able to do that at scale, and I know it's accurate, and I can use that information. It's the same data, whether you're talking targeting or measurement, which is kind of interesting too, right? The measurement data is not coming from a separate panel. It's really the same data sets that are used for targeting are just available in real time for companies like Bob's to be able to do really granular, great, interesting analytics, as long as the identity resolution is done at scale and correctly. And that's the challenge, right? It's kind of putting all this consumer data, or could be first party data from brands, or second party data, as Bruce talked about, to a very large scale accurate identity graph, and just putting those together in a way they talk to each other and they preserve scale. And there's enough pipes in place, that's the other important part, to be able to activate and act on that in a timely way.
I think the interesting thing to the sort of the story about the wider ecosystem to me is that we often talk as if a lot of the challenges are on the sell side. I think you talk to agencies, and a lot of the problems are on the buy side as well. It's not as if every marketeer comes to TV with a perfectly formed data set that supports precise targeting and allows you to carve out audiences across all these different pools of inventory. It's a lot messier and more complicated than that often, I think, is what the agencies are saying.
For sure, for sure. A lot of the investment in the identity space has been made by publishers and the programmatic platforms. And this was talked about earlier, right? But what's happening is that's creating kind of a sort of, garden of silos, if you will, that have their own IDs, and that garden needs to be knitted together. And so you're mixing my metaphors, but you know what I'm saying. And that's where I think you need a company or set of companies that are sort of sit on top of this, that don't have a vested interest in a particular selling inventory or things like that, and can work across these different media companies and platforms to be able to provide kind of that holistic, industry-wide type solution.
So, David, I want to ask you one very quick question, which I know neither of us desperately want to dwell on, but it's a question that rarely gets asked at these discussions. Who pays for all of this? I mean, there is clearly work to be done, both manual and non-manual, and it's clearly not all automated. Who pays for TV identity resolution? Who pays who? How do you get paid as an identity resolution specialist?
Bob pays for everything.
Bob pays for, okay.
Basically, it depends, right? It depends a lot on things like, any given use case. I mean, it could depend on pre-arrangements between parties, but it could be anything from, a brand, to an agency, to a programmatic platform, or any combination of these, a publisher, a research company. I mean, Bob's company I don't know exactly how they work, but they may be buying identity data or licensing it at times to be able to, sync conversion data to exposure data. And maybe they need a way to do that. Or maybe they have their own internal solution. I don't know, but, they need identity to do that. And, even data providers who are seeking to make their data actionable in different environments are also, customers of this stuff. So, who pays for it in the end? It varies so much. I would say that in most cases, the cost is pretty nominal, right? It's a fraction of what you would pay on a CPM basis for the media. I mean, a small fraction.
I think you got to look at Wall Street as the example. I mean, 30 years ago, you had to pay a brokerage house to do a transaction for you. And now all that stuff is free because, there was a lot of inefficiencies into the operations that have been eliminated. And I think our business needs to do some of that. I think that if we drive operational efficiencies into what we do and we make it, easy to buy, easy to sell, and easy to deliver, we'll be in a better spot and it's going to pay for itself. I mean, I don't mean that. I mean, I'm sure if anybody of my colleagues are on here, they're like, pay for itself. No, we need to get paid. But I feel like there's enough inefficiencies baked into our business right now that we can drive operational efficiencies and improve margin.
It's not even just operational efficiency. It's simply scale, right? People say, hey, there's not enough scale in addressable TV. Well, that's wrong, right? I mean, there's more households that have access to OTT than have a cable box. The scale problem is the fragmentation problem. That scale is code for fragmentation.
Kemal will know this joke. I used to say when we went out and tried to sell addressable advertising at Comcast, it was 50 meetings. It took me 50 meetings to get a deal done. It's now maybe down to 20, maybe 18. I don't know, on a good day. But it's like it shouldn't take that long. We should be much better at that.
I mean, it's just to chime in there. I mean, it's education. A lot of advertisers just don't understand what is addressable, how it works. And I think we just, as an industry, we just have to do a better job of educating. And hopefully these panels help.
We sold it as a panacea. We sold it as the best thing since toast on a stick. And it's not that, it's a tactic. And we sold it as a panacea. And I think, now we have to do a little bit of cleanup. Sorry to interrupt.
It's a tactic that should be number one on every brand's list.
And Kemal, in your view, is identity resolution at scale across different MVPD platforms, across platforms and devices, absolutely key to scaling up addressable? Maybe that wasn't clear. Kemal, is identity resolution at scale across different platforms and devices key for scaling up addressable?
Absolutely. It's like, again, we've talked about interoperability is key, and it's in making it not only education, but also making it easier to buy, easier to plan, easier to execute against. All of that is needed to scale addressable.
That's why this consortium exists, right? This TV data initiative. Yeah. And, someone to take the example of Kemal, I mean, he's got great data and it's national. I mean, it's certainly awesome data, but somebody might say, hey, Kemal, Dish and Sling are the answer. And, someone else says, well, it's not enough scale. It's great, but it's not big enough. And that, if we had a way to just be able to sort of bolt on to what Kemal has in an easy way, then Kemal gets more business, his company gets more business, and everybody kind of wins. But it's coming up, it's developing that sort of interoperable sort of, plug and play type solution that is what the industry needs. And that's, I think that's what this group and, some of our companies in particular are working toward.
Kristina, one other question about digital I just wanted to quickly pose to you is really about walled gardens, as we like to call them. I guess when Bob mentioned the duopoly, the 70% of digital ad spend going to two players who both have their perhaps semi-walled ecosystems, might be the best way of describing them. Are there lessons for TV about the way those platforms have scaled up and things potentially that TV needs to avoid?
Well, I mean, I think, again, it comes back to, it sounds like a broken record, but the collaboration in finding a solution that can bring all these solutions together is really what's going to be key in making it work. But I think it's an environment that I think has a lot of potential to avoid a lot of the problems that we have with the walled garden ecosystem in the digital space.
I think to just build on that, I think who's going to make that really happen? Who's going to make that collaboration happen? There's a lot of reasons why these silos exist. I mean, TV is a little different from digital, right? There's a high production cost. It's a lot of investment to make programs and to create an infrastructure to build an MVPD and operate it like a dish. It's different. It's more expensive than digital. And so these companies have a real interest in kind of protecting their own, backyards. But the only group that ultimately can sort of force some of this collaboration is going to be the advertisers, the people.
I was going to say that exact thing. I think that if we start setting up walled gardens, and I'm not to name names, but if Roku does one and another does somebody, it's TV's going flat to down for the last 5 or 6 years for a reason. And if we start doing that, we're going to be in the same boat. And I think we need to be in a situation where all boats rise because of a rising tide. And to do that, we need to work together to get that done.
Again, emphasis is to be the anti-walled garden. That's how TV is going to grow, is you have to be the anti-walled garden.
I want to hear Pink Floyd, Another Brick in the Wall right now, if I can.
Well, I always like to end my panels on a mention of Pink Floyd. So I think at that moment, I fear we are pretty much timed out. We've got through about half our material. We could have gone for another hour, folks. So as I'm guessing you've all taken away, the TV Data Initiative is just up and running. We'll be putting together a really exciting program of debate and engagement and research, which we hope to get as many of you as possible engaged in. Jane, back to you.
Hey, can I say something? Jane, thank you so much for having us. And I thought that I missed Bruce's thing. I apologize about that, but the last panel was fantastic. I can't say enough about this panel, of course, John, but I thought the last one was very, very insightful. So I appreciate you pulling this together.
Well, and thanks, you guys. And hot off the presses, congratulations on your initiative. And thanks, Bob, for jumping on a plane from Florida today to get up here to do this. So
another great sunny day I missed on the beach.
And John in the UK, and Kristina in Berlin, we really appreciate it. And I'll just wrap up here. You guys can kind of go off if you want. There's not much. I just want to say that I think you've all heard that this will not be the last that we hear about identity resolution in the next year to year and a half, probably even beyond. Even at CIMM, I know that you'll hear a lot about this. It sounds like there's a lot of need to test and learn. There's so many approaches and how to get them all to be interoperable, and which ones will end up working and which ones won't, and cohorts and contextuals and IDs and bunkers, and I think we'll all become a lot more versed in this relatively soon. So we will send a link to all of you guys when the video is posted, and all feel free. We'll send around the decks as well, and thank you all so much for attending. Bye.